Welcome, everyone. We are live with another episode of Level Up Law. We're here at Legal Services of South Carolina every Tuesday at noon. We are leveling up your legal knowledge on an area of law that we practice in. I'm Senior Staff Attorney Susan Ingalls, and I'm here with our producer, Kenneth Elliott, and you are viewing live Attorney Rhonda Perkins, who is the Chief of Staff and Marketing Services at the Federal Trade Commission, and we're so excited to have Rhonda here to talk about the Communities of Color report and everything that the FTC is doing in that area, and also to share some of the data from here in South Carolina. So it is Women's History Month, but in particular, this week is National Consumer Protection Week. And so it's very timely to have this subject on both counts. So I do want to go over a couple of things before we get started, and that is we do want you to know that this broadcast does not involve legal advice. It's just general information for the public. If you need the help of a lawyer, you can call our intake line here at South Carolina Legal Services or apply online, and all of that information will be provided at the end of Rhonda's presentation. And also just a reminder that producer Kenneth Elliott always uploads a recording of our episodes to our YouTube channel. So you can go to the playlist there for Level Up Law and find this and all the other over 80 episodes that we have there on different topics in the areas of law that we practice in. So now I want to also mention Rhonda can answer questions today if there's time at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you do have any questions, be sure and put them in the question box, and we'll be monitoring those so she can hopefully give you some answers. And again, we will be posting this broadcast on our YouTube channel, but we also do encourage you to go to all of our social media channels, like and subscribe. We have Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course YouTube. So please go there and look for SC Legal Services and be sure and get all that great information that we're always sharing out. So now that's enough of that, and let's turn it over to Attorney Rhonda Perkins. We're so excited to have you with us, Rhonda.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm excited to be here with South Carolina Legal Services and the Level Up Law program to talk about the FTC staff report on serving communities of color. And before I get started, I will just say that everything that I discussed today do not represent the views of the commission or any particular commissioner. So I'll start by telling you what you'll hear today. I'll start with some background information. Then I'll talk about a few law enforcement actions. I'll discuss the findings of new FTC research, which includes community-specific information. I will also talk about the top reports from people in South Carolina. Then I'll give you some information on resources and how to spot and avoid scams and other consumer issues. I'll end my presentation by letting you know how we can work together to amplify these messages. And then, as Susie mentioned, I'll take questions at the end of the presentation. The FTC's mission is to protect consumers from fraudulent, deceptive, and unfair practices in the marketplace. The FTC is also charged with preventing anti-competitive practices. The FTC has always worked for all consumers, but research and experience make clear that fraud and other unlawful practices can target or have a disproportionately negative impact on different communities, including communities of color. And fulfilling the agency's mission requires doing research on how different communities are affected, bringing cases to stop practices that target or disproportionately affect those communities, providing education to help people avoid harmful practices, and collaborating with trusted organizations who work with those communities to help accomplish those goals. The FTC's Every Community initiative uses strategic planning to address disparities and other issues affecting various communities and population segments. And those communities include Black Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, older adults, lower income communities, veterans and service members, immigrant groups, LGBTQ plus people, women, the disability community, minority-owned small businesses, rural communities, children in foster care, incarcerated and reentry populations, and others. And last fall, in October of 2021, the FTC announced the Serving Communities of Color report that provides an update on the agency's progress in the last 5 years to address disparities and other issues affecting communities of color. And the report focuses on law enforcement, outreach, and research. And I'll cover some of the highlights of the report, but you can find the entire report at ftc.gov and just search for Serving Communities of Color report. So I'll start with law enforcement. Since 2016, the FTC has brought more than 25 actions where we could identify that the conduct either specifically targeted or disproportionately impacted communities of color. And what you see on the screen are some of the areas where we brought those actions. And I'll provide some specific examples in this presentation. But some of these cases include auto buying issues, such as deceptive ads or discriminatory financing terms, deceptive advertising by for-profit colleges, bogus prepaid cards, government impersonator scams, and these affect every community. We've also seen promoters of money-making opportunities that target Black and Latino consumers. And lastly, we found that student debt relief schemes have a substantial impact on communities of color. Now, this list is not exhaustive. You'll find additional areas of law enforcement in the report at ftc.gov. There are many law enforcement actions described in the report, but I'm going to go through some specific examples. Each of the cases that I will mention is described in the report with the full name of the case, a link to where you can find it on our website. You'll find press releases, court filings, and related consumer education if you would like more information about the specific allegations, how we resolved the case, and advice for consumers who might be dealing with some of those issues. First, in the Bronx Honda case, we alleged that the company discriminated against Black and Latino car buyers in violation of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act by charging Black and Latino borrowers more in interest than similarly situated white borrowers. We also said that the defendants told employees to target those groups, but not to try the same practices with white customers. In Cowboy Toyota, we alleged that an auto dealer used deceptively advertised loan and leasing terms in a Spanish language newspaper, but used fine print disclaimers in English that contradicted those claims. And on the screen, you'll see an example of one of those ads. In University of Phoenix, the FTC alleged that the defendants used deceptive advertising to attract students, including ads that targeted Latino consumers and members of the military, and that the ads gave false impressions about job opportunities available to students. FTC economist Dr. Devish Raval's analysis of the customer database in the University of Phoenix case showed that consumers affected were more likely to live in a majority Black zip code, compared to the general population. And as you see in this graphic, we were able to get refunds and loan forgiveness for the affected students. And in several cases mentioned in the report, we were able to get money back to people. The FTC has also brought numerous actions against student loan debt relief operations. Here you see an example of when we worked with our state law enforcement partners to crack down on these types of schemes. Dr. Raval's analysis of several student loan debt relief cases found that people affected by those cases were more likely to live in a majority Black zip code compared to the general population. The analysis of the customer database in one of those cases, for example, Strategic Student Solutions, revealed that the people affected in that case were over 196% more likely to live in a majority Black zip code compared to the general population. So I know I just threw out a lot of numbers, but why does this matter? When we know how certain communities are affected by certain practices, it helps us think about where we should be putting our law enforcement and education resources. Here we have a couple of more case examples. In the Blessings in No Time case, we, along with the state of Arkansas, alleged that this blessing loan, which is a type of pyramid scheme, targeted Black consumers who were suffering financial hardships during the pandemic with promises of high investment returns. We alleged that they ended up losing the money that they paid. And in the Moda Latina case, we alleged that the defendants targeted Latina consumers with Spanish language ads and telemarketing pitches offering large profits working from home, selling luxury products. But instead, they were left with hundreds of dollars in losses and unsellable products. In Herbalife, we alleged that this multi-level marketing company aggressively promoted its business opportunity in Spanish and English materials, telling people they could quit their jobs and earn thousands of dollars per month. The analysis of the list of people that we used to get money back to those people showed that the consumers affected were more than 200% more likely to live in a majority Latino zip code compared to the general population. So those were examples of various money-making opportunities that targeted specific communities. I also mentioned earlier impersonator scams. In the ABC Hispanic case, the FTC alleged that the defendants made unsolicited calls, typically in Spanish, and falsely represented that they were affiliated with the government, well-known companies, or a Spanish language radio station. And according to the complaint, the defendants falsely told people that they were specifically selected for a language course or other services, and if they declined or canceled early, they could face serious consequences such as lawsuits, arrest, or incarceration. There are other topics in the law enforcement section of the report where we were able to identify that the conduct disproportionately impacted communities of color. As I just described, sometimes the impact on a community was described in the court filings because we had that evidence at the time. Sometimes we determine this after analyzing the data from a customer database. In other areas, we note that outside research, such as government studies or academic research, has demonstrated how particular issues impact certain communities. For example, in the Amazon Flex and Uber cases, we allege that the companies deceived workers about potential earnings from delivery and ride-hailing services booked through online platforms. Research has shown that communities of color are disproportionately represented in providing these types of services. We've also brought actions under the Fair Credit Reporting Act related to credit reporting issues. And this is incredibly important given the role that reporting accuracy plays in employment, credit, and housing opportunities. And studies have shown that communities of color face significantly more issues when it comes to credit and consumer reporting. This is even more important with many of the concerns related to the eviction crisis due to the pandemic and its effects on communities of color. And for those of you out there in the legal services community, I know that you all know doing eviction defense work, how important these issues are and the outsized impacts that we see on communities of color. The FTC has also prioritized bringing cases to address other problematic practices that research and experience show disproportionately affect communities of color, such as payday lending and debt collection. FTC staff are also examining how surveillance practices and the use of artificial intelligence may have disproportionately negative effects on communities of color, such as algorithmic bias or discriminatory impacts of facial recognition technology. And we are always interested in hearing about concerns related to these types of issues. So how do we identify affected communities? Here are just a few ways that we do that. We look for advertising in certain languages or geared towards certain audiences. We may find discussion of how certain communities are targeted in a company's emails. Sometimes we get information from informants, such as current or former employees. We ask for tips from other law enforcement, legal services providers, and other organizations that serve particular communities. Also, if we know from analysis of data in prior cases and experience that particular communities are disproportionately impacted by certain practices, we may look for cases in those areas. We try to publicly identify the communities affected by certain practices when we can. It helps us track cases, it informs our work, but we also use this information to get the attention of organizations that serve communities of color and the media. Organizations want to know what we are doing to serve specific communities. They want to know what's the point of filing a report with the FTC. They want to know what are we doing with that information. Here you see some examples where the FTC publicly identified a particular community that was targeted, such as in press releases, complaint allegations, and images of ads in different languages that we used in court filings. And I mentioned earlier disparities that we'd seen in reloadable prepaid calling cards. And here you see a snippet from the NetSpend case. And the complaint alleged that consumers found that after loading substantial sums of money onto the prepaid cards, they were unable to activate the cards and their balances were depleted by inactivity fees. The complaint also alleged that the company marketed to African Americans who were unbanked or underbanked and to Spanish-speaking consumers. Now let's talk about what new FTC research found regarding how communities of color report to the FTC and the types of consumer issues that different communities report about. So the research that I'm going to discuss based on FTC data is based on an analysis of consumer Sentinel network data. This is where people file reports with the FTC, but there are also reports filed by other federal and state agencies, the Better Business Bureau, and others. And in 2020, the agency received more than 4.7 million consumer reports, which was a notable increase over prior years. And based on all the reports, the top 3 most reported problems were identity theft, imposter scams, which we also refer to as impersonator scams, and issues with online shopping and negative reviews. And further analysis of this data gives insights into the communities that reported to the FTC, such as the types of concerns reported, the payment methods used, and other details about people's experiences. So now I'll talk a little bit about those specific findings. So this chart, which you can also find in the report, illustrates the differences in the rates of reporting for Black, Latino, and white communities. So the FTC does not collect information related to race and ethnicity. This analysis, conducted by an FTC economist, uses the zip code information that people voluntarily provide when they file reports. The economist then maps that information to US Census Bureau information about the demographics of people living in that area. And what we found was that communities with a majority of Latino residents, that's where the population in those zip codes is 50% or more Latino, have filed reports at a lower rate than communities with a majority of Black or white residents. And you can see that represented in the blue line on the graphic going down. The rate of filing for Latino communities gets progressively lower as the population share of Latino residents increases in that community. We also found that communities with predominantly Black residents, and that's where the population in those zip codes is 75% or more Black, reported to the agency at a higher rate than communities with predominantly white and Latino residents. And you can see that represented by the red line going up. So we talked about rates of reporting. Now we'll talk a little bit about different issues that different communities report. Our research shows that fraud and other consumer issues play out differently in different types of communities. For example, impersonator scams were the top consumer issue reported by people living in majority white and Latino communities. And you can see that in the blue and green lines. But for people living in majority Black communities, that's the red line on the graphic, the top report was about credit bureaus. And this includes issues such as a credit reporting agency providing inaccurate information, or failing to investigate disputed information, and also difficulties obtaining free annual credit reports. We also found that people living in both majority Black and majority Latino communities filed a larger share of reports to the FTC about car buying problems, issues with banks and lenders, credit bureaus, and you'll see on the chart that the difference here is significant, also about debt collection, and that's compared to people in majority white communities. And for debt collection, that was particularly true for people living in Black communities where we saw those higher reporting rates. Latinos filed a larger share of reports about business and job opportunities. And to see these graphics, as I mentioned, you can find it by searching on ftc.gov or Serving Communities of Color staff report. So one thing that we think is important is looking at how people pay when they're reporting about different consumer issues or scams that they're dealing with. One finding in the research is that people living in majority Black and Latino communities file the largest share of their reports about paying scammers in ways that have few, if any, fraud protections. For example, cash, cryptocurrency, money orders, and debit cards. While people living in majority white communities file the largest share of their reports about paying with credit cards. And these findings are significant because credit cards come with some legal protections if the transaction is fraudulent. Debit cards offer some protections for unauthorized charges, but people have fewer or no protections with those other payment methods such as cash, cryptocurrency, and money orders. And we see this as a call to do more outreach and messaging around these issues. And we know that not everyone has a credit card, not everyone has the same access to the banking system, but understanding the protections that go with the different payment methods can make a big difference if something goes wrong. One other issue I'd like to highlight is about cryptocurrency. So fraud reports in which people reported paying with cryptocurrency have skyrocketed. And this is important since we've noted that different communities report paying differently, and people in majority Black and Latino communities filed more reports paying with cryptocurrency. In 2020, the FTC received around 11,000 reports with a loss of $129 million, in which people reported paying with cryptocurrency. And that number is not broken down by any particular community. That's an overall figure. But in 2021, the FTC received around 39,000 reports reporting a loss of $750 million with cryptocurrency as the payment method. So we really want people to be on high alert. If someone says, in order to receive this service or whatever it is they're trying to sell you or get your money for, if they say you have to pay with cryptocurrency, cash, gift cards, money transfers, that should raise huge red flags. And it's probably a scam. And you can find more information about that on our website. And I'll also talk about that a little bit later. But if someone says you have to pay with those payment methods, really be on high alert. So I've already mentioned some of this, but I'd like to summarize some of the community specific findings. So starting with the Latino community, law enforcers hear less frequently about scams and other problems from communities with a majority Latino population. And this finding suggests that further outreach efforts on consumer issues would help people recognize and report scams. The top scam reported to the FTC by people living in majority Latino communities was impersonator scams. And this includes things like fake calls claiming to be from the government. Also, research shows that people living in majority Latino communities filed a higher share of reports about credit bureaus, banks and lenders, auto issues, and debt collection than majority white communities. People living in majority Latino communities filed a higher share of reports about business opportunities and job scams than people living in majority Black or white communities. And people living in majority Black and Latino communities filed the largest share of their reports about payments made with debit cards, and also reported a larger share of payments using cash, cryptocurrency, and money orders. But for people living in majority Latino communities, they filed a larger share of reports about bank transfers or payments and wire transfers. And once again, all of these payment methods have fewer fraud protections if something goes wrong. Now I'll summarize some of the findings specific to Black communities. For people living in majority Black communities, the top report was about credit bureaus, such as having trouble correcting inaccuracies on credit reports. FTC research also shows that more often than people living in white communities, people living in Black and Latino communities reported issues with banks and lenders and debt collection. People living in majority Black communities filed a significantly higher percentage of reports about used auto sales than majority Latino and white communities did. Once again, this is an area where we see it important to make sure people have the resources that they need to understand some of the issues surrounding auto sales. And as I mentioned before, analysis of FTC cases against student loan relief operations showed that people affected by these cases were more likely to live in a majority Black zip code compared to the general population. Also, analysis of the customer databases of 2 FTC cases involving money-making schemes showed that when people lost less than $500, a higher number of those consumers lived in predominantly Black communities rather than predominantly white communities. And once again, predominantly is when it's more than 75% of Black residents in a particular community. So people living in majority Black and Latino communities filed the largest share of reports about payments made with debit cards, and they also reported a larger share using cash, cryptocurrency, and money orders. But people living in majority Black communities filed more reports about payment apps or services and gift card or reload cards. than people living in other communities. I know this is getting a little repetitive, but we think it's important and significant because of the different protections that go with different payment methods. And so it's really important when someone demands that you pay with those types of methods. It's really hard to get your money back, if not impossible. So we just want to make sure that people are getting those messages. So the analysis of the disparities in consumer reporting that I discussed does not include Native American, Asian American, or other communities because the number of zip codes with a majority of residents from those groups was too small to provide useful results. But I do want to share what we know about consumer issues for those communities. During the pandemic, we've seen marketers capitalize on health concerns to push unproven products and services claiming that they prevent, treat, or cure COVID-19, including products advertised to Korean and Vietnamese speaking communities. For example, in the QYK Brands case, the FTC said that the defendants failed to deliver on promises to quickly ship face masks, sanitizers, and other products. And we allege that they marketed to Vietnamese American communities in the US using Vietnamese language videos on a Vietnamese American TV station. The FTC has also sent hundreds of cease and desist letters to companies in the US and abroad to stop making unsubstantiated claims that their products can treat or prevent COVID-19, including letters to marketers targeting Korean American communities. And we found that when we've sent those letters, those claims usually come down shortly thereafter. And the FTC has brought cases against companies that do not take down claims. In Tate's Auto Group, a case against a group of 4 auto dealerships, the FTC said that the defendants falsified people's income and down payment information on financing applications and marketed deceptive ads offering vehicles for sale, financing, and lease. Many of the customers were citizens of the Navajo Nation, and the dealership frequently ran radio and print ads in Navajo media. To reach these and other communities, we work with trusted sources from within those communities. And in the FTC's press releases about the Tate's Auto case, for example, we acknowledged the valuable assistance of the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission during the investigation. So we're constantly looking for partners in these communities that can help us see what's going on, alert people about scams and business practices that may be targeting them, share information to spot and avoid these issues, and to encourage people to report. So I talked about research from the Serving Communities of Color report, which was released last year. And that was based on analysis of consumer Sentinel network data from 2020. Last month, the FTC released the Consumer Sentinel Network Data Book for 2021. And this newly released data shows that consumers reported losing more than $5.9 billion to fraud in 2021. And this is an increase of more than 70% over the previous year. The FTC received fraud reports from more than 2.8 million consumers in 2021, with the most commonly reported category, once again, in terms of fraud, being imposter or impersonator scams, followed by online shopping scams. And prizes, sweepstakes, and lotteries and business and job opportunities were also in the top 5 fraud categories. So what are we seeing from South Carolina? On this slide, you see the top 10 reports for South Carolina, which includes reports about identity theft and credit bureaus. And the top fraud report is about imposter scams. And as I mentioned before, this is when a scammer pretends to be a trusted person or company, such as someone from the government, a relative in distress, a well-known business. Someone might be offering you a job, but really trying to get your money and pretending to be some well-known company. They might pretend to be a technical support expert or a romantic interest. And these are all ploys to get your money or personal information. You'll also see the total losses in the fraud category for South Carolina was more than $46 million. It's a significant amount of loss. So it's so important for programs like these to help us get the word out about what people are seeing to help avoid lose money in the first place. So this information was recently released in the FTC's 2021 Consumer Sentinel data book, and that's where this page is from. So you can access this graphic just as you see it. But you can find up-to-date information going forward about what's happening in your state at ftc.gov/explore data. And that website has a lot of different tables. You can select your state and see the top fraud reports and dollar loss. You can find additional information broken down by metro area, and you can see other tables about COVID-related reports, debt collection reports, reports from military consumers, and more. And all of that information is publicly available. It doesn't identify any particular consumer, but it's just aggregated data based on reports that we've received. Here's a little bit more information about South Carolina. You see some of the identity theft reports, including credit card fraud, and this can include new or existing accounts, loan or lease fraud, such as an apartment or house rented using someone else's information, auto loans, student loans, real estate loans, phone or utilities fraud. It could be a new or existing landline or mobile phone account that's been compromised, employment or tax fraud. And the other identity theft category includes things such as email or social media, insurance, medical services, and online shopping accounts. So now that I've told you a lot of the different reports and consumer that we receive and consumer issues, let's talk about resources. The FTC has lots of free resources that are available to help you and others in your community identify scams and other consumer problems so that people know what to do and where to report them. So over the years, we've listened to people in different communities to learn about the consumer protection issues affecting them and the most effective ways to educate members of their community. Then we created campaigns to give them information that they need in the formats that work for them. So here are just a few examples. Consumer.gov is a website for consumers who want just the basics written in a plain and simple style. And it's very popular with legal services attorneys, community groups, and teachers, among others. Pass It On is an education campaign that empowers older adults to share what they know with others, and it helps them play an active part in the fight against fraud. And in our experience, we found it very effective that when people talk about issues that they're dealing with, they're less likely to lose money. So when you can pass on that information to someone else, it really is helping your community. We also created Spanish language fotonovelas, and these are comic style booklets that help raise awareness about scams targeting Latino communities. You can order free publications from the FTC. Just go to ftc.gov/bulk order and browse the catalog. You'll find publications on how to avoid scams, business guidance, privacy, cybersecurity, and more. And most publications are available in both English and Spanish, and some are available in other languages as well. So we have a lot of consumer information on our website, but I want to highlight ftc.gov/scams. On this page, you'll find advice on how to avoid scams and what to do if you were scammed. It also lists the latest scams that are going on. And whenever there's any type of disaster, a pandemic, people are looking for charitable donations for something terrible that's going on in the world, a scammer will be there to try to take advantage of people. So it's a great resource for you and for anyone who asks you, does this sound like a scam? Ton of information there. everything from job scams to romance scams, phone scams, impersonator scams, and what to do if you lost money. So it's a lot of information to help people know what to look out for and what to do. I mentioned that identity theft is one of the top reports that we receive, but also from people in South Carolina. And the FTC's website, identitytheft.gov, provides a plan with step-by-step guidance to recover from identity theft. It's also available in Spanish at robodeidentidad.gov. So what else can we do to work together to address issues that people in our communities are facing? Outreach is an integral part of the FTC's work to protect consumers in all communities. And the FTC has grown its outreach efforts to reach communities of color by listening to and working with trusted sources in those communities to deliver messages in an effective way. But we need partners to help disseminate that information, particularly in communities of color. So when people see or experience scams or other consumer problems, we want to know about it. We do not resolve individual complaints, but we do use the reports to investigate and bring law enforcement cases. Reports also help us to identify trends and know what scams to alert people about so that they can protect themselves, their friends, and family. And when someone filing a report follows a few short steps on reportfraud.ftc.gov, and that site is also available in Spanish, the report is instantly available to more than 3,000 federal, state, and local law enforcers across the country. And once someone tells us what happened, they'll get advice on what to do to recover and how to guard against fraud in the future. But we know that not everyone feels comfortable providing information into a government database, so people can file anonymously, and advocates can also file on behalf of a client. Legal services organizations can check out the FTC's Community Advocate Center. By joining the Community Advocate Center, legal services organizations get a unique link to reportfraud.ftc.gov, and you can use that link to help clients report fraud to the FTC and get information on how to try to recover money lost. And legal aid offices can visit reportfraud.ftc.gov/community to get started. Here are some ways that you can stay connected. One way that we can all help each other is by sharing good, trustworthy resources when we find them. And I hope you'll share our resources in your communities. I'll tell you that I signed up for our consumer alerts at ftc.gov/consumer alerts. I work here, but even I don't know about all the scams that are going on out there. So it's a great way to know what's happening so that you can help other people avoid those problems. You can go to consumer.ftc.gov for articles, blog posts, and infographics. And I mentioned the bulk order website before. When I worked for legal aid, I used to order materials from the FTC and place them in our waiting area. And for issues that I knew were impacting my clients and the local community, I would take those materials and hand them out when I did outreach. And we did a lot of outreach, so I would constantly take those materials. They were very useful. And if you would like information geared specifically towards advocates, I invite you to join the email list for advocates by sending an email to rmendez@ftc.gov. And thank you. So once again, here are a few resources I hope you'll take a look at. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And thank you to Susie and South Carolina Legal Services for having me and helping the FTC spread the word about the consumer problems we're seeing in different communities and what people can do to try to address them. And I can take questions, but first I'd like to make sure people are aware of some of the local resources from South Carolina Legal Services. And here you'll see contact information and some of the resources that are available.
Well, thank you so much, Rhonda. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that you were a former legal aid attorney at, I believe, Legal Aid Justice Center in Virginia before you
Yes.
started your career at the FTC there. And I know you've been at the FTC for 10 years, so you certainly know what you're talking about. But that was a great presentation, so much great information. I do have one question here, and that is about the legal services attorneys reporting as an advocate for a client. Is there a problem if the client has already made their own complaint? In other words, should the attorney also make a complaint, or is that, you know, a problem?
I wouldn't say it's, oh, I'm sorry, Susie, did I cut you off?
No, that's fine.
I wouldn't say it's a problem. Sometimes we do get duplicate complaints, but if you as an advocate have additional information and it makes it easier for you to do it instead of asking the client to go back in. I know as a formal legal service as a client, and the attorneys are stretched thin too, but sometimes giving the clients an additional task, maybe they'll have time to do it, maybe they won't. But if you have additional information that would provide a more fulsome report, that would provide additional information, which is really what we need in order to dig in a little deeper, I don't see anything wrong with that. If it makes it easier for you and the client to get that information into the database, when we do go through complaints, we're able to take out duplicates. So I would say that that's not a concern if it helps get more information.
Great. And here's another one. How long does it take for a complaint to get handled at the FTC? I guess from the time it is filed till the time there's some sort of conclusion of it.
Is that a question about a report that a consumer files or a complaint that we might file in court?
Yeah, I think it means a report from a consumer, looks like.
A report from a consumer. It depends, and we do not resolve individual complaints, so we don't want to set expectations that if you file a complaint on X date, someone's going to call you up in a couple of months. What someone gets when they file a report is information about how they can recover, steps they can take to avoid fraud in the future. But because we don't resolve individual complaints, I can't give an answer about when a certain complaint might be addressed. It may depend on what types of cases that we're looking at. And I know in cases that I've investigated and filed, sometimes I contact a consumer for additional information within 3 months of filing a complaint. It might be a year later. You may not hear from anyone. And just because you don't hear from anyone doesn't mean the report isn't looked at or used to identify trends or to investigate a target. But an individual will not necessarily receive a particular follow-up on an individual complaint, which I know is frustrating, but we do use that information.
Well, I know that, and I think that's all the questions we have at this point, which says to me that was an excellent presentation that kind of covered everything. I did want to also definitely recommend the websites that you mentioned that that you all have, the reportfraud.gov and the identity theft, because those are really great websites, a lot of great materials there. And, you know, I know that the FTC materials are for attorneys as well as just the general public. So I highly recommend your website, ftc.gov, to anyone who's listening, because those materials are excellent. And as I said, both for attorneys and for individuals. So we really appreciate everything that the FTC does, and appreciate so much you being here today. I know you got a busy schedule all the time, but particularly on National Consumer Protection Week, which we are celebrating this week and sharing all our resources out to the public to make sure they know the resources that we have locally here at South Carolina Legal Services. But let me also take a moment to thank our audience. We really do appreciate you tuning in to Level Up Law. You know, we have it every Tuesday at noon here on our channel, and we just really appreciate that everybody tunes in. And I want to say that if you found this helpful, which I'm sure you did, and you know it'll be helpful to others, whether it be attorneys or individuals in the general public, please do go to our YouTube channel tomorrow at South Carolina Legal Services and share the broadcast. We want as many people as possible to get this important information that Rhonda has been sharing with us, and to know about all the ways that you can get some help and some information from the FTC. And while you're there, be sure to like and subscribe for more, and sign up for those notifications while you're there, so you'll get a notification every week when we post a new episode. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Level Up Law on Tuesday at noon, as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month. And I do want to just one more time thank you, Rhonda, for joining us and for your presentation. It was really great.
Thank you for having me, and we really appreciate this opportunity to share this information, and thank you to everyone who attended.
Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in today on Level Up Law, and that concludes today's webinar.